Hello everyone, it's Seiji and today's video is an introduction to shoujo horror manga. So at this moment there isn't a lot of information available in English about this genre, so I figured that I would go out and find a couple of Japanese resources and use my own experiences to make this video, I guess. So I have previously spoken about how horror manga came to fruition in the mid-60s and early 70s in a video about vintage anime and manga, specifically the horror genre. So if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link in the description box down below and a card up above. In any case, I spoke about how shoujo horror has always been a part of horror manga because the time in which horror manga was becoming popular coincided with the landscape of shoujo manga being revolutionized by this huge influx of female mangaka during the late 60s and 70s onwards. So to give you a bit of a backstory here, and I think I've actually told this story a couple of times now, but I don't really mind. And nevertheless, before the 60s, the shoujo manga industry was heavily dominated by men. Actually, the entire manga industry was majority male. And at that time, shoujo manga was seen as a lesser form of art, especially in comparison to shonen manga. And so what you would often see is that men would enter the industry starting with writing rather boring, superficial pieces of shoujo manga, and then after having gained some experience, they were then able to, play at the big boy table and then start writing shonen manga. Now, the women who started working in the industry in the 60s, however, saw the potential there was within shoujo, and so they started to write stories that were more complex and touched upon taboo topics such as gender and sexuality. So a couple of genres that really became popular were science fiction, fantasy, historical fiction, and horror. Throughout mainly the 60s up until the 90s, there were so many shoujo magazines such as Hana to Yume, Ribbon, Jiao, Nakayoshi, Margaret, who were publishing horror stories. There were even shoujo magazines that were dedicated to solely publishing horror, mystery, and all-round dark tales. The most notable by far was Asahi Shimbun's Halloween, which also actually published Junji Ito's Tomie. So yeah, that's a fun fact. Now, having said all of that, I want to talk about some of the characteristics that are very particular to shoujo horror. Of course, there is quite a lot of overlap between josei horror because essentially the difference is that the target demographic is a bit older. Nevertheless, shoujo horror is quite distinct from shonen or seinen horror. So let's start by talking about beauty and aesthetics in general. So it's quite well known that shoujo manga is heavily concerned with beauty, with aesthetics, and so it doesn't come as a surprise that this is also very prominent within shoujo horror. The thing that I personally find to be very interesting is the variety of ways in which this theme sort of gets explored. The most straightforward way, of course, is the general attention to beauty. It's rather easy to tell whether or not a horror manga is shoujo or not just by looking at the art, especially when they are a bit older. Dead giveaways are like these huge galaxy-like eyes, the flowy and curly hair, and also the intensity with which the characters express their feelings. There's also this phenomenon which is the bishonen, which are like these tall and lean androgynous men with long luscious hair and brooding looks in their eyes. With pieces in particular that feature romance heavily, you'll find that beauty is what's used to quickly draw you in. So you'll have a lot of shots of like the girl and the guy like looking beautiful, staring outside the window or something dramatic like that. And that is to make the love story all the more attractive to the young girls which these manga target. Beauty is also used as a contrast to the horror. When looking at the aesthetics of the covers, it's quite easy to see this. For instance, two pieces that I have here. The first one I already showed you, but you can see that you have like this lightness at the forefront with these two beautiful characters, and then in the background you have this wench, this witch or something, and she's a bit darker. Yeah, that's in the background. You'll have in this one this girl with again the huge eyes. She's the pretty girl, and then at the back you have this horrific scene. So this is something that you'll often see with these covers, or just in general, you'll often see that the background is very dark and at the forefront you have a lot of light where the main characters, the pretty girls and boys, are standing, often horrified. In the context of the material itself, this juxtaposition with beauty and horror often heightens feelings such as dread and disgust, at least in my opinion. A good example of this is a short story from Kazuo Umezu from the 80s called Zesoku, and I actually found it in this French edition of one of Umezu's short story collections. It's not available in English, unfortunately, but I did do a review on this in French. I'll leave a link to it in the description box, and I'll put a card here as well. The video has subtitles, so you can safely watch it. Anyway, yeah, let me just find the story here. Oh, yeah, okay. So, like I said, it's called Zesoku, and it centers around this girl who has a crush on a guy, and this guy is so mean, just absolutely the worst. He tells her that she's an idiot for thinking that he would actually like a girl with her weight, and so she decides to start fasting in order to draw his attention. And it works. They meet after school, and at first he doesn't even realize that this is the same girl he scolded like a couple of weeks ago. Either way, they start making out, but because this girl has been fasting, she is really hungry, and so by mistake she just rips this asshole's face off. And yeah, she just starts digging in. She's eating him. So the last page actually is just filled with panels of her just having a chunk of his meat in her mouth. That did not sound good. Let's do that again. So the last page is filled with panels that feature her having pieces of his flesh in her mouth, and just the juxtaposition of this pretty girl. She was pretty before she started fasting, mind you, and just this douchebag's his I guess like ravaged body. It's just really horrifying, and I like the effect that this contrast kind of like gives. So yeah, it's great. Tomie, which is a manga that I mentioned earlier, is also a very good example of this. For those who might have not heard of this manga, it's about a girl called Tomie, who is sort of this femme fatale. Men who have the misfortune of encountering her often meet their demise in very ugly ways. Tomie is actually presented as the epitome of beauty, but as you read the manga, you quickly start to notice that there is a very ugly side, an absolutely hideous side to her. And the best way I think that this contrast is shown is in this infamous panel of Tomie, where you have her face and then like another morphed creepy Tomie at the side. I'll put a picture somewhere on the screen for you to see. But yeah, I think because of that contrast, it's the I guess the meaning behind Tomie as the manga is, it's presented beautifully in just that one panel. I don't know if that was grammatically correct, but I hope you understand what I mean. But I think it's just so beautifully terrifying. I think that's the right word to call it. But yeah, Tomie is really interesting in that besides this contrast of beauty and horror, there are two other ways in which beauty is used in Tomie, which you also see in a lot of other shoujo manga. The first one is beauty as a tool to disguise a person's or a creature's true nature, in a way to trick people and lure them in. Tomie is a very stunning woman, and that's what attracts all of these men. Those who end up meeting their demise through Tomie never really care for her personality or her as a human being, if you can even call her that. Anyway, all they really care about is her beauty, and it blinds them from seeing the true danger that she poses. And this again leads me to my second point, which is the obsession with beauty. These men are so captivated by Tomie's beauty that they are willing to sacrifice their entire life to behold her, to be close to her, to own her. So yeah, they stop eating, they ruin their careers, they break off any meaningful relationships that they had previously to knowing Tomie, and that is how Tomie causes them to lose everything that they had going for themselves. And that loss, in combination with Tomie's eventual rejection, because that's what she often does at the end of the story, she rejects these men, and that is what pushes them to the brink of insanity, because now they don't have Tomie and they also have nothing else left to live for, and their decisions at that time is usually what causes them to die, essentially. In other shoujo horror, you will actually see the reversal of this obsession. So it's not from the point of view of the admirer, but rather the other side. You'll often see characters so incredibly obsessed with either becoming pretty or retaining youth and beauty. And often in these manga, you'll see that that desire very quickly turns into an obsession, which in the end makes them go to absolutely dire ends to achieve their goals. And in that timeline, they will either morph in something absolutely horrendous, or they end up making a dumbass decision like selling their soul to like a demon or something like that. Another key characteristic to shoujo horror is of course love and romance. This obviously shouldn't come as a surprise. You'll either have romance at the center of the horror story or just as kind of like a side thing. And In general, I just really like the inclusion of romantic relationships or anything close to that, because I just feel that it adds an extra layer, in my opinion. Anyways, when romance is at the center of the story, it's either a love story about two people where one of them harbors like a dark secret that never stops haunting them and eventually starts to affect their relationship, or it's forbidden love, like a vampire and a human, or situations where people like their parents disapprove of their relationship and they get cursed or something like that. So quite often these couples are driven to make immense sacrifices, such as giving up their humanity, or sometimes they're just cursed for eternity. And then one of them has to go out and try and break this curse. So a good example of this is The Bride of Deimos, which was created by Etsuko Ikeda and Yuho Ashibe. Based on Roman and Greek mythology, this story centers around Deimos, who is in this rendition not the son of Venus, but actually her brother. And they fall in love, which, you know, isn't really seen as cool. So Venus gets killed, and so she is sent to the underworld, and so now Deimos has to go to Earth, find the reincarnation of Venus there, and get her to the underworld so that Venus can inhabit her body and they can live happily ever after. And so in the manga you get to know this high school girl called Minako, who apparently is the reincarnation, and so Deimos is trying to convince her to travel with him to the underworld. And in the meantime, he just gets to chill on Earth and spread dread and terror, as you do. So yes, that's all I have for now on love and romance. I quickly just wanted to go over gothic manga as well, because it's not very popular. So this genre is actually mostly prevalent within shoujo, and the reason as to why I think this is the case is because gothic literature lends itself quite well for romance. That's not to say that there aren't any shonen and seinen gothic manga, because there are two good examples of Vampire Hunter D and Hellsing. Anyway, gothic manga mainly has the same themes as gothic literature, you know, these big old castles, very spooky, sinister atmosphere, mystery and mysterious deaths, supernatural beings such as vampires, think of Frankenstein, stuff like that. A classic piece of gothic shoujo manga is Rosalind no Shoujo, and that translates to Rosalind's portrait, or like a portrait of Rosalind. The story is about a young student named Edward who inherits this huge old castle. While exploring the castle, Edward comes across the portrait of Rosalind, who was the wife of the former owner and who was also murdered by said former owner. Edward is absolutely fascinated by the portrait, but when his sister and one of his friends stops by to check in on Edward, they notice that something isn't quite right about his fascination with Rosalind. So yeah, having shared some information about, I guess, the basics of shoujo horror manga, I wanted to leave you with a couple of recommendations from mangaka who have had a huge influence on the horror genre as a whole, and more specifically shoujo horror manga. So the sad part is that I'm pretty sure that most of these have never received an English translation, either traditionally or even with scanlations. So I'm pretty sure that they have become actually rather obscure. Nevertheless, I have them, so I might either feature them in Otaku Field Notes, which is my podcast, or just in like a separate video. But since these are older pieces, it's most likely going to be in like a separate video where I discuss a couple of them. Nevertheless, let's get into them. Oh yeah, so the first one is Se Rosalindo. Yeah, Se Rosalindo, which translates to Saint Rosalind, and this was written by Masako Watanabe, and it centers around this girl called Rosalind. So also I should note, Masako Watanabe is actually like the queen of shoujo horror and shoujo mystery. She really laid down the groundwork for so many mangaka that followed after her. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Anyway, yeah, this story is about an 8-year-old called Rosalind, and she, on the surface, looks kind of sweet, you know, like, oh, cute girl, she doesn't do anything. But, you know, the more you read this manga, the more you'll find that quite a lot of people around her are starting to die. And, you know, maybe she might be the cause of it, maybe not. Most certainly she is. So, yeah, this story is just about a demon child that ends up killing a lot of people. So yeah, I've read a couple of pages, not that much, but yeah, like I said, I'll review it in the future. Moving on. Yeah, so the next one is Masako Sone's short story collection. It's called Broney no higeki, so the tragedy of the Broney family. Oh, also, yeah, I should note that Masako Sone is actually known for like pioneering the occult romance manga genre. So yeah, anyway, this is a short story collection, like I said. The titular one is about this girl who gets sent out into the woods to live in a small shed with her nanny, and then all of a sudden this little boy comes prancing through the woods, and he comes to meet her, and turns out this is her little brother. Essentially, her parents I guess expelled her from their huge mansion when she was 16 for some mysterious reason, and then several years later she ends up coming back and tragedy ensues. Yeah, I read this short story. It's actually quite nice. Yeah. Okay, what do we have next? We have... Oh, yeah. We have this one. This one, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Jogoku de mesu ga hikaru. And it was written by Ryoko Takashina. Yeah, okay, just had to check my notes for a second. Yeah, so this is a story about this young lady here called Hiromi. So she was actually not as pretty as she's displayed on the cover page. She was actually I can show you a picture of her here. ちょっと待って. Yeah, this is how she initially looked, and because of her appearances, her mother and sister don't like her, also because she is the product of an affair that her father had with some rando. So yeah, she's not very much liked at her home. She gets abused, and at some point she has had enough, you know, so she just decides to jump off a cliff. And then this doctor sees her and then saves her, and he's like, you know, I can make you beautiful. And so she's like, okay, I don't have anything to live for, just make me beautiful. And so he does so by, I guess, transplanting her memories or brains into this android model thing, humanoid, blah blah blah. And yeah, and so she's like, oh my gosh, I'm pretty, etc etc. But this doctor has more sinister plans. And yeah, that's what this story is all about. Okay, so we have reached the last piece, and it is one that I was actually reading this weekend, and it was pretty good. It's called Ikisudama by Nanae Sasaya, and it's a one-shot consisting of 4 stories concerning this girl called Yuko Asaji, and she's obsessed with this boy named Roji. And the thing is, Roji is pretty popular. There are girls who are interested in dating him, and so Yuko is kind of like a yandere. And yeah, she tries her best to get what she wants by eliminating the other girls. So Ikisudama refers to a so-called disembodied spirit that has left the body of the host in order to haunt people or places, and apparently Yuko is one of these people who can like let her soul fly out of her body and like kill people. So yeah, I read the first 2 stories, the first 2 stories, and it's pretty good. Not the best, definitely, but yeah, I would love to do a review on this. Okay, so that is everything. I know I've been rambling for quite a while, but I hope that you enjoyed this video. So yeah, thank you so much for watching if you still are. So if you enjoyed the content that I make on this channel, perhaps consider joining my Patreon. We have a Discord and a book club. We talk about manga, anime, knitting, roller skating, like just a lot of random stuff. So yeah, that's loads of fun. If you're not interested in that, you can also help me out by gifting me a coffee, or you could just like this video, give it a thumbs up, or leave a comment in the comment section below, or subscribe. Maybe hit the bell button if you'd like to receive a notification whenever I upload a new video. So yeah, that's about everything. Like I said, thanks so much again for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you in another video. Cheers!